You're listening to Don't Waste Water.
We produce research that is only on papers and it's just there, and then nobody is using it. For example, the use of chitosan for absorbing the dyes has been researched since so many years ago, but there is no filter, there is no one using this research in the industry. Why? And I started learning that why, because it's more complex and you need to change more things. But I think that shift from the lab to the field should be the goal.
Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast.
Seeing all the shrimp shells that is discarded and now they are in the landfills, and it's a problem for the shrimp farmers, and we can value that and get a higher value to that waste and produce this chitosan and use it in wastewater treatment. The whole process for me, it was very interesting. It's still my dream to be here and produce in the region chitosan.
I'm your host, Antoine Walter, and in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Maria Amorin as my guest.
How to approach them, how to get into a sector that is conservative sometimes, that you need to do.
You're very polite to say sometimes. It is conservative point.
That you need to innovate in adopting another technology and how to navigate that sector.
Maria is the CEO and founder at Indequi, the mother company of Crustatec, on which we'll focus today.
I was thinking about getting these large stainless steel reactors that are very expensive for the production. And then I went to India, and they are using some concrete vessels that they use some paint, like epoxy paint there for the reaction. And I said it could be a model that could be adopted in Guatemala.
Crustatec turns wasted shrimp shells into powerful wastewater treatment solutions, leveraging sustainable chitosan.
We have an advantage here that we are starting to treat the wastewater. We don't have this process yet. But I think that if we start with these natural polymers from the beginning, we can go ahead.
This podcast is brought to you by Simple Lab. Roughly 1 year ago, I received a nice message from one of you, my beloved listeners, one that came from Lisa Neuberger, acting specifically in that message as a senior advisor for the World Bank. It introduced me to a World Bank initiative called the Youth Water Innovation Challenge, launched at the COP28 in Dubai in 2023, which saw 1,600 teams featuring founders between 18 and 35, applying from 95 countries, to join in the first ever water accelerator organized by the World Bank. From the 1,600 teams that registered, 300 got screened for application and 40 semi-finalists shortlisted. And that is how 9 months ago I got to MC the pitching day, where the 40 semi-finalists presented their companies to a jury of water CEOs and investors. We held that one live, so you may have noticed it, and it was a fun and packed day full of great energy and pitches, and the ever surprises you get from any kind of live event, right? As a result, 20 teams got selected to enter the actual accelerator, which then went on for the next 6 months. And last December, I was back for the final pitching session, where all the finalists came in again to present to a renewed panel of CEOs and investors in hope to get to the next stage of their companies. And within this creme de la creme of water entrepreneurs, I got to pick 3 of them to present them to you on that very microphone, which I'm glad to do starting today with Maria Amorim and her flagship project, Crustatec. Now, if you're like me 9 months ago, you maybe don't know chitosan yet and the link it has to shrimp shells, so that alone would already be worth of your attention this week. Indeed, what if the mountains of shrimp shells polluting our landfills could actually clean our water? And what if the future of water treatment wasn't in chemicals but in seafood waste? But there's also much more in Maria's path, with some great entrepreneur wisdoms, inspirational discoveries, and I would even bet that by the end of that interview, you may want to think of your water investor profile and may want to have a call with her once you noticed that with 20% of industrial wastewater coming from textiles, Crustatec may have found an unlikely yet powerful solution in shrimp shells. If so, just let me know. I can be the mailman and you can make an opinion for yourself. Just after I remind you that if you like this episode, please take it and share it with a friend, a colleague, your boss or your team, and I'll meet you on the other side. Hi Maria. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
It's interesting to see you in a different setting. I'm looking forward to dive even deeper into your path and into what is the core of it, but also what brought you to it. But let's start with a bang. If I recall right, the very first pitch I saw of you, Crustatec is solving 3 issues. One has to do with the textile dye pollution, the second has to do with municipal wastewater, and the third has to do with an environmental hazard, which is the waste from the seafood industry.
Exactly.
Of the 3, what is the most pressing one, and how do you solve it in a unique fashion?
Among the 3, the textile pollution is the most pressing. Why? Because 20% of the industrial wastewater that need to be processed comes from the textile industry. And the current technologies for treating wastewater contaminated with dyes are costly and difficult to operate. And we have here in developing countries a textile industry that is very small and rural. They don't have the infrastructure or the knowledge to apply all the other technologies. That's why we start working on a filter that could be used by this sector.
So if what they have today is costly and difficult to operate, I guess your filter is affordable and easy to operate.
Yes, so it's a recirculation filter. You still need electricity, but it's recirculation. So you put the wastewater with dyes in a container and it circulates. Like in each cycle, it absorbs the dyes into the chitosan. That is the main product.
So I'm going to pretend I know everything about chitosan because since we spoke, I made myself a bit more clever, but I might not have been the only one at the time you first spoke about it who had no clue about it.
Yep.
So that's the part which is linked to the seafood waste. Can you tell us what chitosan is and how it's linked?
Yeah, this shrimp shell waste has a composition of minerals, proteins, and a polymer that is called chitin. If we extract that chitin, we can produce chitosan. And chitosan is a polymer that has a positive charge in all the chain. So it helps to attract all the pollutants that are negatively charged in the water, and it can be used as a flocculant or to absorb the dyes.
Okay, so it's not only a flocculant, it's also used to absorb the dyes.
These dyes also have like negatively charged. So it works like a magnet, like it attracts the dyes.
So you have somewhat of a Russian doll structure because that is like your flagship with Crustatec. And Crustatec is part of Indequi, which is also your baby. So what's your elevator pitch to Indequi and what do you aim to do with it beyond Crustatec?
Okay, yeah. So when I started with Crustatec, it was a program that you needed to build a company for your products, right? But I was thinking about a bigger umbrella because there are other biomaterials that could be interested. And also I identified like a gap here in Guatemala on the industries wanted to do some research and development. Usually in other countries, you have like this partnership with universities, but here we don't have that. So I thought maybe that could be like filling the gap of this research and development, and how can I also help other industries to do some research and development and optimization of the process. So I think that's like the big umbrella, but the most important project had been Crustatec.
Before I go into the full story, are you a chemical person who got into water by accident, or are you a water person who happens to be very versed in chemical processes?
I think I'm more into the materials and the biomaterials, but I got in love with chitosan and the importance of bringing into the water pollution. That was like the path. More into the biomaterial, but with applications with the water, yeah. And I have learned like a lot there.
Your encounter with chitosan, if I'm right, happens at the EABAG in Zurich.
No, that was after.
Before,
yeah.
Tell me the story.
Okay, so I think with chitosan, I was in the last year of university and we were exploring biomolecules and these biopolymers. And I was actually working with starch, but my friends were working with chitosan. And I got like in love with all the properties of, and this is waste and you can obtain this molecule and have all these advantages. And there was a science fair. They were looking for projects. So I applied, and that's how it begins. So I started doing some research, very small research, on how to obtain it and how that work with wastewater. And then after that, I came across with this program that is called Young Water Solutions Fellowship. They were looking for young people with a water project that could be transformed into a social enterprise. So I applied to that project, and that was like the change that shift all my path to that way. We went to Switzerland, but working with C was to start our startup, actually our prototype first. So I spent some time in Switzerland working with CWAS, and that's how the idea of a filter started. Before, it was like just research, how can this work with textile dyes, but the idea of working on a filter and this prototype was because of Young Water Solutions. So they gave us seed funding for doing the prototyping and everything. And that's how I started. Then I started working here with that seed capital, working on the prototype and everything. And that year also I had the opportunity to travel to India to see how they are producing on a large scale. And that changed like my mind on how to implement a production facility here. Because of the Young Water Solutions program, they put me in touch with EBWA. So after my master's, I did an internship there at EBWA, and we were exploring the chitosan as a conditioner, as a flocculant, no filter, and no dyes there, just municipal wastewater. So I think that was the beginning of the other product that is like the flocculant.
Sorry to interrupt Maria and this conversation flow, but I wanted to quickly thank my sponsor, Simple Lab. If you're in the water industry and you're running a water quality sampling campaign or tweaking plant process performance, Simple Lab has you covered. You can easily order online from over 275 commercial labs. Simply put, Simple Lab is a one-stop shop for everything from routine testing kits to specialized analyses like PFAS or microplastics. You don't have to juggle multiple labs and complicated logistics anymore. Instead, you get a single, streamlined process for ordering kits and reviewing results. Plus, there's always a real person to talk to, so if you're tired of cobbling together lab documents and quotes and services for each new requirement, or you just want to try a new way for more efficient testing of water samples, check out Simple Lab. They're all about making water quality testing, well, simple. So head to their website, the link is in the description, line up the tests you need, hit order, and let them handle the rest. Thanks Simple Lab for supporting my work. Check them out to support me, and back to me. Let me see if I get that one right. That means you do fundamental research at university, which gets you into chitosan. And then you go to kind of applied research, which brings you to the first product, because that brings you to developing the filter. And on that way, you also happen to get a first idea of how to industrialize that, because you look at how chitosan is dealt with in India. Then when you come back to Switzerland, they say, oh, by the way, yes, there is this textile dye stuff, but there is also a municipal and even a small scale wastewater topic, which you might be able to solve with a flocculant. So you have really those two different product lines which are built from that.
Yeah, exactly.
I was, for 6 years, a direct neighbor to EAVAC.
Oh.
Like literally, I saw them from my window.
Oh, really?
I know how they have this thing of running around and finding application cases and then really doing it like hands-on. So what was your hands-on experience at EAVAG, and where did you build up your second product, the flocculant?
It was on their facilities, and actually it's like very interesting that we import wastewater from Guatemala to Switzerland to make some tests. We needed septic tanks water, and we needed to use the one from Switzerland and how it was different from the one here in Guatemala. So they have these facilities. They're like pilot plant facilities, and we did jar tests where you put different doses of the polymer and put it like in stirring mode. And this is like the start of how can be used on a wastewater treatment plant. And we use the chitosan that we were producing here in Guatemala. And we study also factors as the length of the chain of the polymer, how that affects the flocculation. And also I learned about the importance of using the samples of the field, because before I was no, everything needed to be so standardized and we need to have all this. But after doing this fundamental research to get into the field and use the samples of the field, and it's more complex. So I started like shifting to the importance of using these samples. How is the perception of, for example, efficiency in the field that in the lab? So I was like, no, the efficiency is 4.97, and that's very different from 4.80. And my supervisor was like, no, it's not really different. Like in practice could be work. So I learned how to change my mind to the field.
I would see two things here. The first is it's the plague and the blessing of the water industry, which is like every water is different and the water somewhat decides. And the second is that we are an empirical science, like hence an pseudoscience almost sometimes. So good enough is something in the sector. You don't need to be like 99% perfect all the time because anyways, conditions change. If I get you right, you were working on your own produced chitosan at that stage already. That means you've been working on that value chain even before you had the flocculant project. How do you build a value chain and how difficult is it?
It was a small production, like working on using the shrimp shells from here, from Guatemala, that the industry discards, and producing the chitosan on a very small scale at that moment, but enough to be using in these pilot projects. So we start making partnerships and having conversations with the industry here that discards the shrimp shells and doing the process of the extracting the chitosan and that optimization. Yes, that was on my time in the university.
Sorry to catch you because I've seen your pitch, so I've seen the pictures, but in order to get everybody up to speed, if I recall right, you have this shrimp industry, which is called industry, but it's more artisanal than real industry. And the shrimp shells are literally sitting in a pile on the side of the road, and that's what you're collecting. So when you say partnership, does it mean that they bring it to you? Or do you also have like a truck and you collect all the stuff and bring it to your transformation factory?
Actually, we have both. We have a very like artisan fisheries and local markets that discard the shrimp shells. But we also have the larger industry. But with them, we have make like conversations, but had been a bit difficult to negotiate on how to obtain the shrimp shells, because now they know that they have a value. We have done some research using their material, but it was more about our internal logistics and go to the markets and get the shrimp shells from them. Yes.
There's no moment in time where you think, okay, what I'm doing here sounds like impossible at so many levels. Why am I even doing it? I mean, you're building a value chain, you're building a product, you're building something internationally. How do you dare to do all of that?
Seeing all the shrimp shells that is discarded and now they are in the landfills, and it's a problem for the shrimp farmers, and we can value that and get a higher value to that waste and produce this chitosan and use it in wastewater treatment. Like the whole process for me, it was very interesting. It's still my dream to be here and produce in the region chitosan, because it's been done in different countries, and why cannot be produced here and in the region?
So would that be Guatemala for Guatemala or Guatemala for South America? Or would it be like Guatemala biosource for the rest of the world?
Guatemala for Guatemala, I think, but also in South America, there are other countries that are producing shrimp in a larger scale, like Ecuador, Mexico, and there's nothing in the region about production of chitosan.
You mentioned how India is already doing it at a larger scale. Mm-hmm. Where are they sourcing their chitosan?
From the aquaculture farms and also from the shrimp. Okay. Yeah. And they are using it locally and also exporting. And that was like a different mindset that I learned there, because before going to India, I was thinking about getting these large stainless steel reactors that are very expensive for the production. And then I went to India and they are using some concrete vessels that they use some paint, like epoxy paint there for the reaction, on. And I said, this could be a model that could be adopted in Guatemala, but you need investment for doing that still.
The story you're unveiling here and unrolling here makes me think there's a major learning here in your path, which is really go hands-on and go to the fields and do the stuff.
Yeah.
Because it seems like you had ideas and then you had field feedback and then you learn that water is different and then you learn that it's an empirical science and then you learn that scrappy can be better than building everything out of the highest end materials. That sounds like the absolute guide of entrepreneurship. Do you happen to have that since you're a child and you knew all of that? Or how did you get the entrepreneur mindset?
I was really interested in how we produce research that is only on papers and it's just there and then nobody is using it. For example, the use of chitosan for absorbing the dyes has been researched since so many years ago, but like there is no filter, there is no one using this research in the industry. Why? And I started learning that why, because it's more complex and you need to change more things. But I think that shift from the lab to the field should be the goal. I need to learn a lot about entrepreneurship and also like finances, and because that's not my background. And that's why when I was doing my master's, I did my master's in materials chemistry at the University of Edinburgh, and they have these Edinburgh innovations. They were offering courses and pitch competitions and everything. So I started like trying to get more knowledge on that field.
And you won a business ID contest.
Yes. So the support from Edinburgh Innovations has been very important for us to have this funding. And also I participated in an accelerator program after completing the master's there. And it was just science-based entrepreneur because it's very different from other types of entrepreneurship. So I learned how to move from the research, from the science, actually, to the business.
Actually, at that stage, the journey is far from being over because you've already visited almost every continent, yet you've not been in North America within that story. And that's the next stop because you go to Kalamazoo in Michigan, if I'm right?
Yeah.
What do you learn there and what does it add to the story?
Okay, yeah. So that was under the Young Leaders of the American Initiative. It's for entrepreneurs. So they give you some masterclass on entrepreneur and then you go to the United States to a company to do an internship. And the company is usually related to your business. So they allocate me in Kalamazoo, Michigan on the wastewater reclamation plant. The suggestion was to compare the chitosan that we were producing here with the traditional synthetic polymers that they are using and doing this comparison with efficiency in the wastewater treatment plant. So it was a validation of how these natural products work and that had the same efficiency, and also going into the costs, because for bio-based materials the cost is still higher than the petroleum-based products, but you need to work more on sustainability and the other problems that using a synthetic product generates. For example, if you use a biopolymer, you can compost then the sludges. But if you use a synthetic one, then you need to have another treatment.
What you demonstrate there is that you have the same efficiency than the chemical-based polymer. When you say more expensive, what is the ballpark figure? Are we talking like 20% more expensive, 3 times more expensive, 10 times more expensive?
Like 30%.
Okay, so it's still affordably more expensive.
I see a difference when working in Europe. They were like just thinking about sustainability, and in America we are still working with something like in cost. But for example, with plastics, like it's cheaper. The synthetic plastic coming from petroleum based are cheaper still, but some other sustainable solutions are more sustainable with the environment.
So does that mean that when you notice that, you think that your market might be in Europe and North America, or as you're a mission enterprise, your rollout also to happen on the solutions end in Guatemala, Latin America, and hence you need to work on the cost. What's your vision?
I think some countries are more prepared to acquire these sustainable solutions, but I think that the current technologies of sustainability and circular economy are getting into the whole world. So I hope that we can have the adoption of these other technologies. And also, like, we don't need to rely on importing from other sectors because we have it here and we can produce it. That's my hope. I was listening to one of your podcasts that you did with Kemira.
I was going to mention it. Yeah.
Yeah, and she mentioned how the market could ask you for these bio-based products instead of we need to market that.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I was going to say, which is that Kemira is arguably an installed player in that field, and they do the move to bio-based. They acknowledge that it might be more expensive to start with, but if that's the sense of history, it's hard to fight history. And I guess everybody would agree that there are merits to go bio-based. You gave one, which is the composting of the sludge. The other is, of course, that you're decorrelating yourself from petrochemical derivatives. That is a clear merit. That's about the point in time in the story where our paths cross for the first time. Because I've discovered you in the World Bank's Youth Water Innovation Challenge, but when I came in, they had already pre-selected the semi-finalist, if you want to call it that way.
Mhm.
How do you apply to that program, and how do you go through the first stages?
So I came across again with this program. They were looking for young entrepreneurs with some track on water-related companies, and I saw all the benefits, like the accelerator program and the networking, and we will receive a market validation and this compensation. And I really wanted to be part of it, and also because it was again on water, because it's very different. My previous accelerator was for science-based startups but not
Mhm.
focused on water, and other programs were just for entrepreneurs and with so different programs. So I think, okay, this is a good opportunity, so I applied there. Yeah.
You didn't really need a stamp because you already had the MIT stamp. EAVAG is kind of one of the main institutes for water. Edinburgh is also pretty well known. You've been all the places, but I guess along that stamp collection, having the World Bank
Yeah,
stamp
yeah.
is not the worst.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yes, yes, and also like they have experience on the field, and they have experience in so many places, and I really wanted to be part of it.
So I was there during the pitch, and to me it was obvious that you would get selected. I was just the MC. I had no power on that, but to me it was obvious, and I was glad to see that you got selected. Tell me about the accelerator itself. Who was mentoring you? What did you learn on that for the first time, really water-specific accelerator you went through?
Yeah, so I had some knowledge of the industry sector, how to approach them, how to get into a sector that is conservative sometimes, that you need to do
You're very polite to say sometimes. It is conservative, point.
that you need to innovate in adopting another technology and how to navigate that sector. I was working with Nihal, but also Lisa present me to Diane, and we have also a master class on something, for example, like storytelling or how to get funding. And I think that the focus on water, it was very important for me, how to navigate that sector.
The fact that it's organized by the World Bank might be misleading because there's bank in World Bank, and so you would expect to earn money out of it, but it's not the case. It was not a funded accelerator, which means you don't get like some millions to go play with it. It's not the way it works.
Mhm.
So across your entire path so far, you mentioned the seed, but did you have to raise money? Are you actually raising money now, or how do you deal with that financial end of the story?
In this moment, I think Crustatec needs to get investors. We have MVPs, we have validated our technology, but we need to scale up production. And also, we need funding on how to get the certifications, like the regulations. I am navigating right now the regulations here in Guatemala and are not so friendly with the science based entrepreneurs. Like you need like some licenses, and for that license you need another license, and yeah, that loop that costs money. Yeah.
Within the World Bank's process and across everything, you notice that you have a promising product market fit, but you need to have the certifications because, yeah, the water sector is conservative, but is also protected by a bunch of layers of regulations. And also you need to scale up your production. You seem to be very good at pitching, obviously. So how are you pitching yourself to the investors who are listening to that? What would be your value proposition to them?
You need to prove your sales, but that's like the loop that these entrepreneurs can be like. If you don't have the certifications, you cannot have like big sales. If you don't have the big sales, you cannot prove. So I am trying to get that all these pilot projects and all this research is working, but I am having these bottlenecks here. So you need to trust more in the research and in the pathway that we have been doing, because if we don't get that, we are not going to get out of that loop.
So today, would you say that Crustatec is a biopolymer company, is a specific chitosan company, or is it a water filter company, or is it really like an innovation body that could be all of the above and more?
It could be all of the above, but I think it's a shrimp shell waste biorefinery company that is working on wastewater treatment products based on the chitosan, not other. We see that the chitosan has many applications, so it could expand, but right now, working on that. My first idea was to produce here the chitosan with the shrimp shells here and all the process. But we can also produce the products with some other countries that are ahead of us. But still, you need the certifications and everything. So we are working on that.
Layman question here. If you're not using your shrimp shells to do chitosan or to do like an added value product out of it, what do you do with it? You compost them, you landfill them, you burn them? What's the traditional output?
Yeah, they send it to landfills, or they try to compose it, but it's not as easy. Like the shrimp shells is not easily degradable because it has like the minerals there. And also it's a focus of bacteria and flies and a material difficult to treat, but they are just putting into landfills.
I'm thinking of that because you mentioned how you're open to roll out in other places. And I guess you've developed a know-how on how to convert a waste into a valuable product. And that can be scaled up at your current facility. It can also be exported as a process know-how, and then you become a process company, and then you're not the one putting like the big capex in the ground because you need to build a factory. You're more of a process expert. So how do you see your role in the future? What part of the food chain do you want to be in that ecosystem?
I had these conversations with the shrimp farms here, like aquaculture shrimp farms here. And my idea was to try to build like a joint venture with these shrimp farms. We use their waste, but maybe they have the money. But that has been like difficult, but I still think that is an approach. Or if you have an investor that could use the waste and produce that and then sell the chitosan. As the company that I visited in India, they are just producing chitosan. They are not producing like the end products. I am really interested in how that works.
You graduated with quotation marks from the World Bank's accelerator in December last year. So now we're 2 months later, almost 3 months later. What is the next step for you?
Getting the investment for a scale-up production and to comply with the regulations. If we don't comply with that regulations and certifications, we are not going to get into the market.
What type of investment are you looking for? Are you looking for an angel investor who supports you with this regulation hurdle and how to overcome it? Or would you say you're at the stage where you say, no, it's proven. We have like MVPs in the field, pilots in the field, we've proven it works. It's more a VC play and invest in us, we might disappear because it's not so easy to do resource recovery, but we might also explode and be like a big thing.
It could be a BC if they are willing to change their mind to the impact and not just on the sales, because we cannot sell on large scale if we don't have this certification.
You're pre-revenue, which is not fully uncommon for a VC. That's their waters. That's why I'm mentioning VCs and not just angels. And it would also open the door to a different type of check to cut.
Okay.
And we see that VCs have increased interest in the sector. So you're probably, in terms of timing, at the right time at the right place. I have a crystal ball question for you, which will also help us to understand the next steps in your path. If you look towards 2030, what is an ideal position and shape of Crustatec by 2030?
I am still dreaming of a facility that uses all the shrimp shell waste here in Guatemala and produces chitosan, sells the product. Like, we have an advantage here, I think. Could be an advantage, could be a problem, that we are starting to treat the wastewater. Like, we don't have this process yet. But I think that if we start with these natural polymers from the beginning, we can go ahead.
When I started with my 2030 question, my podcast was in 2020, 2021. And so it sounded like something super far in the future. But now we're in 2025. So 2030 is not that far in the future. So what needs to happen in the next 12 months to keep you on track of that 2030 goal?
Scale our production.
It's top priority right now. So open message to the investors listening to that. You're good at pitching. I'm pretty sure you would be happy to pitch to them. So if they want to reach out to you, I'm happy to be like the mailman.
Thank you.
Reach out to me, or we'll put also your contacts, of course, in the show notes, but happy to give more context because I've seen you pitching now a couple of times, so I can maybe give some personal thoughts and context to that.
Thank you.
You have another hat, which I'd like to cover. I had a conversation with Milind Patel on that microphone maybe 2 years ago, and Milind has a consultant side of him, a water sommelier side of him, and also an element where he's going to museums and doing animations to get people interested in water. And it's always a pleasure to see him report on that, making videos on that. I'm like, okay, that's exactly what we need to make that sector sexy and attractive for a full new generation. And it seems to me like you're venturing in similar waters. So tell me the story.
I am a scientist because my parents have an organization called Ciencias Sin Fronteras that they are science communicators. And my dad developed an awesome science show with inspiration from some of the US TV shows presenting science, and mostly on the Christmas lectures where Michael Faraday used to do experiments for the people on Christmas. And so he developed this science show, and I started with them since I was a child, like going there and seeing like the presentation, they show what do you need to present this science with this, and also how do you learn from fires, how do you learn from electricity problems if you don't see like it. So they start this organization for the involvement of children and also adults, but in a fun way, with demonstrations that help us to understand the science behind. So I have been working there since so long ago. In my case with Crustatec, I had support from different organizations, and not so much here in Guatemala, but international organizations. And so with Ciencias Sin Fronteras, I started looking for that. So we had a grant funding last year from the Biochemical Society, and we went with UNICEF to schools with this science show to bring more girls into science.
How do you find the time?
I don't know. I am very curious, and I get bored easily. So I need to have different things.
I think I can relate to that. So, Maria, it was a pleasure to have that deeper conversation with you.
Thank you.
If that's fine with you, I'd like to switch to the rapid fire questions.
Okay. Yep.
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
What is the toughest challenge, in your opinion, for a water tech startup?
I think innovation, like get into the market.
So the adoption of the innovation, or the
The
innovation
adoption
itself?
of the innovation. Yeah.
What would be your single piece of advice for the founders and managers of the about 1,000 early stage water startups?
I think that that they start thinking about innovation and not like water sector is not just infrastructure and the thing that we have been doing for many years, but how they can adopt innovation.
What's the drop of knowledge you wish more investors knew about the water sector?
That could be improved. Like we have different solutions that could be improved in different areas.
What was your most unexpected partnership and what did it bring you?
When we managed to do the pilot project of the production, like moving from the lab production to a pilot project, it was with paint and crayons, a blue company. They are manufacturing these school products, but the equipment was the same. So they allow us to use their equipment to produce the chitosan. And at the beginning, I was like, why we need to get the compensation with this guy? He's working on a very different field, but the equipment was the same. And that was the pilot production project that we managed to obtain.
Yeah, that's an incredible example of unexpected. It's a really good one. Super short. Profitability or growth?
Growth.
What's the next profile you'll hire?
Regulatory and compliant expert.
To me, it's a super boring field. Like, it's really the thing I could not do. But I do get how that's absolutely important in the path of a water company. So yeah, I hope you find that person. Opening new markets or doubling down on the current ones?
Doubling on our current ones, yeah.
What is that tool that nobody speaks about, but you could not live without?
The field testing, like going into the field hand-on, but because sometimes the things don't work out as in the lab or as in paper. You need to go there.
That was an interesting red thread around all your stories. I'm glad you bring it back. What's the single piece of insight your ideal customer profile needs to hear right now?
That sustainability is not a cost, it's something that they need to implement to keep growing and to keep active in the market for the upcoming years.
What are you desperately needing and want to raise an open call for right now?
We are desperately to increase our production, but that will help to overcome some bottlenecks about the regulation, but we need to expand our facilities.
Last question, what can and should I do for you?
This was awesome. I think that this experience was awesome.
Again, that was a very great pleasure to have the opportunity to go deeper into your path and to understand what was beyond the pitches and discussions I had seen so far. And it's fascinating what you're building. I'm amazed by your path. I think it's inspiring at many different levels. I'm curious to see how people react to this one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.